1 Samuel chapter 7, beginning with verse 2, reading from the New International Version of the Scriptures. The word of the Lord is as follows. The ark remained at Kiriath Jearim a long time, 20 years in all. Then all the people of Israel turned back to the Lord. So Samuel said to all the Israelites, if you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourselves of the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths, and commit yourselves to the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the Israelites put away their Baals and Ashtoreths, and served the Lord only. Then Samuel said, assemble all Israel at Mizpah, and I will intercede with the Lord for you. When they had assembled at Mizpah, they drew water and poured it out before the Lord. On that day they fasted, and there they confessed, we have sinned against the Lord. Now Samuel was serving as leader of Israel at Mizpah. When the Philistines heard that Israel had assembled at Mizpah, the rulers of the Philistines came up to attack them. When the Israelites heard of it, they were afraid because of the Philistines. They said to Samuel, do not stop crying out to the Lord our God for us, that he may rescue us from the hand of the Philistines. Then Samuel took a suckling lamb, sacrificed it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. He cried out to the Lord on Israel's behalf, and the Lord answered him. While Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to engage Israel in battle. But that day the Lord thundered with loud thunder against the Philistines and threw them into such a panic that they were routed before the Israelites. The men of Israel rushed out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines, slaughtering them along the way to a point below Beth Kar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen. He named it Ebenezer, saying, thus far the Lord has helped us. So the Philistines were subdued, and they stopped invading Israel's territory. Throughout Samuel's lifetime, the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines. Thus far, the word of the Lord. You may be seated. While Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to engage Israel in battle. But that day the Lord thundered with a loud thunder against the Philistines and threw them into such a panic that they were routed before the Israelites. The men of Israel rushed out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines, slaughtering them along the way to a point below Beth Kar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen. He named it Ebenezer, saying, thus far the Lord has helped us. I want you just to turn to somebody and just tell them, thus far, thus far, thus far. This particular anniversary of the park, South Charlotte, is notable for two distinct reasons. The first is that it is the 15th anniversary. And there is something about anniversaries that are multiples of 5. You know, you can have your 3rd year anniversary and it doesn't hit you like your 5th year. You can have a 7-year anniversary and it doesn't hit you like the 10th. You can have a 13th anniversary and it doesn't hit you like 15, and so on and so on. There's something about anniversaries that are multiples of 5. Perhaps it may be because 5 is the number of grace. It's the number that biblically speaks of the gracious activity of God. And then there is the number 3. 3 is the number of harmony, of God's presence, of God's divine organization. The Trinity is triune: God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And when God decided to create reality in terms of time, he did it in terms of 3: past, present, and future. And so on the one level, 15 as the product of 5 times 3 speaks of divinely organized grace. I just want you to think about that: divinely organized grace. That is, grace not by mistake, but grace that has been organized by God himself. But then there is another numerological meaning to 15. It is the number that pictures the rest that comes after deliverance. Deliverance in the Bible is by the number 14. According to scholars, the 15th day of the first Hebrew month is the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And that was a day of rest for the children of Israel, which symbolized the passing over, the coming out from bondage in Egypt. The 15th day of the 7th Hebrew month begins the Feast of Tabernacles, which is also a day of rest. And so this number 15, it speaks of divinely organized grace, and it issues a call to rest that comes after deliverance. And so the first part of the uniqueness of this celebration is that it is the 15th year. But the second point of note for us today is that our celebration coincides and intersects with something even more profound and significant. Because on August 25th, if you were listening to TP, and on August 25th, 1619, 1 year before the arrival of the Pilgrims on the Mayflower, 113 years before the birth of George Washington, and 157 years before the formation of our nation, 20 Africans from the kingdom of Indogo, located in what is now called Angola, were brought in chains on a slave ship called the White Lion to the port called Point Comfort, which is now Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia. They were sold for food. And they were the first enslaved Africans captured and brought to English North America. And thus began the transatlantic slave trade in the English colonies, which would later become the United States. These 20 were not the first people of African descent to be in what we now call the United States. Some studies and scholars suggest that if you research the record of older Native American tribes, such as the Washita and the Yamasee and the Nap and the Creek, and newer tribes like the Shoshone and the Seminole and the Iroquois, they say that blacks were the black mound builders, and that they were descendants of black people, including the Mayan and the Aztec, coming from Toltecs and Olmecs. Y'all don't mind going to school for a moment, do you? It is also noted that Africans were in Spanish colonies in America, like Florida and present-day South Carolina. Enslaved Africans were also present in the English colony of Bermuda in 1616. But we note this time of 1619 as being considered the founding ancestors of African Americans. And so consequently, today marks the 400th anniversary of the transatlantic slave trade in the United States. And it's sobering to think of how long the matter of race, racialization, and racism have been alive in this land. The realization of this occurring 113 years before George Washington was born alerts you to the fact that the enslavement of Africans was the amniotic fluid out of which our republic was birthed. It helps us understand how the founders could write such noble documents as the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, while at the same time holding title to African slaves. It explains how in 1787, in an attempt to determine taxation and representation among the colonies, the 3/5 compromise could be written into the Constitution, designating African slaves to be 3/5 human. That is, which legally defined them as human enough to count for the number of representatives a state may have, and less than human enough for them to be seen as property subject to taxation, insuring, trading, mortgaging, and bartering. According to UNESCO, the transatlantic slave trade was unique within the history of slavery for 3 reasons. Number one, how long it lasted, 400 years. Those victimized a specific people, black African men, women, and children. And then thirdly, the intellectual legitimization that was the development of a whole ideology and its legal organization called Black Codes. It involved several regions and continents: Africa, America, the Caribbean, and Europe, and the Indian Ocean. And therefore, it is regarded as the first system of globalization. It's estimated that 25 to 30 million people were deported from their homes and sold as slaves in the different slave trading systems. And in the North American transatlantic slave trade, it is estimated that those deported was believed to be approximately 17 million. And that does not count, that is those who arrived in America. It does not count those who died in the ships, those who died jumping into the ocean, those who died due to wars and raids connected to the trade. And therefore, it is believed to be the biggest deportation in history. The overwhelming majority of those of us of African descent, we owe our existence in this land to somebody who was captured on the continent, loaded in a ship, endured the Middle Passage, was sold as chattel property somewhere along the Atlantic or mid-Atlantic coast, and here we are 400 years later. What a unique intersection of anniversary celebration and commemoration. As I meditated on what word could be lifted for such an intersection between our collective and congregational histories, 2 words from the text that was read leapt up into my spirit. They are the words, thus far. Look at somebody and just tell them, thus far. When I think about my individual and collective context as a person of African descent from Sierra Leone and Gabon, in order for me to be free here, my forebears had to survive the trip chained in the hull of a ship across the waters and then endure the hardships of being enslaved once they arrived. Just saying, thus far, is enough for me. I don't know about anybody else, for me to run and shout the place down, because when you think about it, statistically, you should not be here. They should not have survived what they survived, but they did, and here you and I are right now. This passage before us is a part of Israel's historical narrative in the time that bridges the period before the judges and the kings. It is a time in which Samuel, as the last judge of Israel, his call is that of seeking to bring Israel back from the period where everyone did what was right in his or her own mind. God seeks to use Samuel to bring Israel back to him, where they move from doing what was right in their own minds to doing what is right according to the will and way of God. Our time increasingly is becoming more and more akin to Samuel's time. Ours is rapidly becoming a time where lines are blurred and distinctions are diminished and standards are seen as antiquated suggestions. That's Samuel's time, and so Samuel is seeking to bring the people back. And in the preceding chapters, Israel demonstrated a very loose and lackadaisical approach to God. They had a laissez-faire attitude towards the Mosaic law. And they had a manipulative manner with God's presence as symbolized by the Ark of the Covenant. They tried to use the Ark of the Covenant to manipulate their reality according to their own whims and desires. And so in chapter 4, God checks them by allowing the Philistines to soundly defeat them and capture the Ark of the Covenant. It was so devastating that the daughter-in-law of Eli the priest, upon hearing of the capture of the Ark of the Covenant and the death of her husband, as well as her father-in-law, as she is in labor pushing out her child, she names the boy Ichabod, which means the glory has departed from Israel. What a term to put on your child, Ichabod. The glory of God has gone. That's how dark that time was, not only for her individually, but for the nation collectively. And having captured the Ark of the Covenants, the Philistines experienced months of pure heartache because God reveals to them he can't be kept by them. Though captured by them, he can't be kept by them. That his presence was greater than their idols and that he stood against them. And this causes them to literally send the ark back to Israel on a new ox cart. And it reaches a place called Kiriath Jearim and was taken to the house of a man by the name of Ebenezer. That's where our chapter begins. As now Samuel leads the people in repenting from their serving idols. And as they are in the midst of their worship, the Philistines tried to advance against them. And on that day, the Lord sent thunder so loud and so heavy that it sent the Philistines into a panic and enabled Israel to rout them. With such a great victory, Samuel takes a stone, sets it up in a significant place, and names it Ebenezer, and says, "Thus far, the Lord has helped us." Samuel celebrates the Lord's help. And the word for help speaks of the Lord's aid, the Lord's protection, the Lord's defense. The consistent witness of the scripture is that God helps God's people. Psalm 33:20, we put our hope in the Lord. He is our help and shield. Psalm 46:10, God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in the time of trouble. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from which cometh my help. My help comes from the Lord. That's Psalm 121, who made the heavens and the earth. Thus far, the Lord has helped us. To appreciate the power of those words, you must know what is meant by the two words, thus far. Ask your neighbor, do you know what I mean when I say thus far? It speaks, number one, of the duration of the Lord's help. Samuel's words speak of the duration of the Lord's help. You must know that Samuel was not simply speaking of the 7 months between the loss and the return of the ark, or the 20 years, but Samuel understood that they were a part of a continuum of God's work that began centuries before them. In other words, he appreciated God's current help in light of God's prior help. The God who has helped them in this time is the God who's been helping them all of the time. For as long as they've been a people, the Lord has helped them. From one generation to another, the Lord has helped them. In fact, Moses testified in Psalm 90, verse 1, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. In Exodus 20, God revealed himself to Moses as the God who shows love to 1,000 generations, from the call and promise made to Abraham to the 400 years in Egypt, to the 40 years in the wilderness, to the several hundred years since they've occupied the land of promise. God has helped them. In other words, the duration of time has not been an issue for God as a helper. He hasn't been more help in one time and less help in another time. He hasn't been less help due to the length of time. He's been all the help that he's ever been. He is the eternal God. He is the unchanging God. He is the God who is what he was and will be who he is right now. Thus far, the Lord has helped throughout time, from the time prior to captivity on the continent to the time of the Middle Passage, throughout the duration of 400 years, from the time of our enslaved ancestors' arrival until now. The Lord has helped. The Lord has helped each generation. The Lord has protected each generation. The Lord has assisted each generation. His help has been total and complete. And when we think of our congregational history, even as we celebrate these 15 years, we're not just thinking in terms of the 15 years of this particular campus. We're thinking of the sweep of our history that goes back 106 years since our founding as a small prayer band that would become Gillfield Baptist Church. Think of the duration of your family. Think however far back they can tell their story. The Lord has helped. The Lord has defended. The Lord has led. Think of your life from within the womb to however long you've been living, from the rocking of your cradle to this very present time. The Lord has helped. Thus far, says, there's been no time span outside of the Lord's help. No time too long for the Lord to help. God has helped every time, including this time. Thus far, the Lord has helped us. Not only speaks of the duration of time, but also the distance covered by the Lord's help. How far has the Lord helped them? Well, their particular story starts in a place called Haran, where God calls Abraham to leave what he knows and to go into a land that God would show him. Abraham packs up his bags and leaves Haran, not knowing where he's going, and he eventually lands in a place called Canaan. He goes to Bethel, and then he goes to the Negev desert. He goes down into Egypt, and then he would go back to Canaan. It would then extend back into Egypt during 400 years of slavery, and then follow them out of Egypt to the place called Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the Red Sea. It would then be found in Elim and the desert of Zin, a place called Rephidim, to the wilderness of Sinai, across the Jordan River, the regions of the Philistines, from Shihor River to the east of Ekron on the north. Consider the distance of the Lord's help. From the shores of West Africa to the eastern shores of the mid-Atlantic, to the fields of labor throughout the south, to the migration westward and northward, the Lord has helped. And as that was the case collectively, it is also the case for us congregationally. There's no distance that we've had to travel that God has not helped us. From Gillfield to Mount Olive, the Lord has helped us. From Mount Olive to University Park neighborhood, the Lord has helped us. From the University Park neighborhood to Hyde Park and Hornets Nest, the Lord has helped us. From Hyde Park, Hornets Nest Park neighborhood to South Meck on Park Road, the Lord has helped us. From South Meck on Park Road to South Charlotte, right here on 521, the Lord has helped us. And from 521 to Independence Boulevard, the Lord has helped us. In every place along the length of our journey, the Lord has helped us. And see, if you're listening to me, you would capture this, because what that lets you know, as far as you can go, the Lord has been a help. That there has been no space to which you have gone and to which you can go that God cannot help you, because there's no place to which you can go where God is not present. The psalmist wraps his mind around this when he says, "Whither can I go from your presence? Where can I flee from your spirit? If I ascend into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell at the uttermost parts of the sea, even there will your hand lead me and your right hand will hold me. There is no place that you can go where God is not present. And because God is present everywhere, God's help is available in every place. Think about the distance of your thus far. Think about where it began and how many places it has entailed. Think about the distance in terms of miles, in terms of states of being, in terms of type. My God, just thinking about, you know how far it's been from the field, how far it's been from the farm, how far it's been from the hood, how far it's been from the ghetto, how far it's been from the street. You know how far it's been. You ain't always been where you are right now. I know you want people to think that you just arrived where you are, but come on, can we just tell the truth and shame the devil? I ain't always been where I am right now. You know how far it's been mentally and psychologically. Come on and testify and tell your neighbor, the Lord has brought me from a mighty long way. If you really knew the distance, then you know why I act the way that I act in worship. If you knew the distance, then you understand why I can't be so cute when I think of the goodness of Jesus and all that he's done for me, because I know how far. I know how far. You weren't there. You just been in my right now, but if you were with me in my back then, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Come on. Tell somebody, if you were with me in my back then you'd understand the miles that I've had to travel over the hills and valleys in the darkness as well as the light. You know how far it really is. Thus far, the Lord has helped us. Not only speaks of the duration of time, not only speaks of the distance of the Lord's help, but it also speaks to the degree of difficulty overcome through the Lord's help. When you read this passage, especially in its context, it reveals two types of difficulty that were overcome through the Lord's help. The first difficulty was the difficulty created by the people themselves. Now y'all aren't gonna like this one, because I'm gonna be dealing with you and us. It's self-created difficulty. Israel's history is filled with self-created difficulties. Abraham lying about Sarah created difficulty with Pharaoh in Egypt. Isaac lying about Rebekah created difficulty with Abimelech. Rebekah's favoritism towards Jacob and Isaac's favoritism, my God, towards Esau created trouble, difficulty for their family. Jacob's trickery over the blessing created difficulty with Esau. Joseph's tattling created difficulty with his brothers. The brothers' jealousy created difficulty for Joseph. The people's impatience with Moses on the mountain created difficulty in the valley when they built a golden calf and began to worship him. The people's doubt in the face of the giants in Numbers 13 created difficulty for a whole generation that would die in the wilderness. Achan's taking of forbidding stuff created difficulty for them at Ai. And right here in the text, the people's idolatry created a level of difficulty. It was their idolatry and rebellion in chapter 4 that led to the Philistines routing them and taking control of the Ark of the Covenant. But the Lord orchestrated the return of the Ark to the people, but the people had yet to return to God. You see, God can orchestrate his move while we're still outside of his will. And so chapter 7 begins with the people returning to the Lord by ridding themselves of their foreign gods. And this wasn't done on their own. It would take the Lord's help, the Lord's power to enable them to fully turn away from the idols and to turn back to him. It is God who causes us both to will and to do his good pleasure. By God's help, they were able to overcome the difficulty that they created for themselves. Throughout our collective history, There have been difficulties that we've created for ourselves. An honest look at our history must admit the difficulties that were self-created. It began from the fact that there were tribes and indeed countries that sold sons and daughters to slave merchants and who profited by the slave trading. We have to admit our time in this country is littered with self-created difficulty, the crab in the barrel mentality that causes too many to attack others who are perceived to move too far ahead. The scarcity mentality that causes us to withhold help to others out of the belief that if we help them, we might diminish what we have. We kill more of each other. We sell drugs to each other. We turn on and abandon each other for the silliest and craziest of reasons. We don't support our own institutions. We poison the minds of the young with hypersexualized, misogynistic images and lyrics that glamorize violence, denigrate women, reduces sexual intimacy to an itch that needs to be scratched, eliminating any recognition of consequences to the individual, the family, and the community. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy. And yet, in spite of those difficulties, the Lord has helped us. The Lord has helped discern the good from the bad, the right from the wrong, the healthy from the harmful, the life-giving from the destructive. The Lord has helped you see the right path, choose the right path, walk the right path, stay on the right path, teach the right path. The Lord helped you get clean and stay clean, get free and stay free. And in some cases, the Lord has helped you stand alone, stay alone, walk alone, fight alone, knowing that you're not by yourself, because the Lord will never leave you nor forsake you. He was with you every step of the way. The Lord helped you turn around, turn back, turn away from, and turn to. The Lord helped you repent, return, regain, renew, revive, and resurrect. I wonder, is there anybody in here who does not mind admitting that you got off the rail and your shout is, He led you back into the path of righteousness for His name's sake. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Self-created difficulty. And if we're ever going to accomplish what we should, we got to deal with what's true about ourselves. Self-created difficulty. Sometimes you and I are our own worst enemies. Oh yeah. We do more harm to ourselves than anybody else. Self-created difficulty, but not just difficulty that's self-created, but there's difficulty created by others. Because look, just as the people are repenting, while they're in the midst of their worship repenting, here come the Philistines. Tell your neighbor, if it ain't one thing, it's another. Just when you try to get yourself together, here comes something outside of you, created by the Philistines in an immediate sense. But Samuel doesn't just think of it immediately. He also thinks of it historically. He thinks about the Amalekites and the Amorites during Abraham's time and 400 years of bondage and Pharaoh's army at the Red Sea. He thinks about, my God, the wall of Jericho and the people on top of the wall. He thinks about the 31 kings and kingdoms that they had to overcome. He thinks about the difficulty created by others. Just think about the outside difficulty. Start with sons and daughters and wives and husbands being captured and loaded on ships, being, my God, surviving the Middle Passage. Millions would die before they ever reach. And those who got there, my God, was separated from their loved ones, separated from those that spoke the language, huddled like livestock, placed on the auction block, sold as property to be mortgaged, insured, collateralized for loans, traded as commodities, worked like oxen, hounded like dogs, beaten like strays, wives taken and used for sexual pleasure, husbands lynched, and if they weren't lynched, they were bred like animals. Sons and daughters were sold, and after that was over, Jim Crow, where we were denied basic rights and privileges, where the struggle to attain them was riddled by lynchings and house bombings, assassinations, and German shepherds and fire hoses, substandard schools, outdated outdated books, teachers who possess low expectations, thus far speaks to the degree of difficulty overcome by the Lord's help. And I believe nobody knows like you know the degree of difficulty you've had in your own life. Nobody knows the degree of difficulty, the grief of losing a child, losing a spouse, losing a parent, losing a sibling, losing a marriage, losing a job. Nobody knows the degree of difficulty like the diagnosis, the illness, the tumor, the chemo, the dialysis. Nobody knows the degree of difficulty, my God, the rejection, the desertion, the betrayal. Nobody knows the degree of difficulty, the addiction, the depression, the suicidal thoughts, the doubts and the fears. Nobody knows your degree of difficulty, the letdowns and the layoffs, the put downs and the shutdowns, the discrimination and the mistreatment. Nobody knows the degree of difficulty, the abuse that you face, physical abuse, verbal abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse. Somebody is feeling it like the psalmist in Psalm 94 verse 17. Unless the Lord had helped me, I would have soon settled in the silence of the grave. I cried out, I'm slipping, but your unfailing love, oh Lord, supported me when doubts filled my mind. Your comfort gave me renewed hope and cheer. Is there anybody who can say that's me? Thus far the Lord has helped me. When I think about the duration, when I think about the distance, my God, when I think about the degree, I've just got to say thus far the Lord has been my help. When we were helpless, while we were yet sinners, the Lord helped us. The Lord sent us some help in the form of his son named Jesus. When we were lost and on our way to hell, the Lord sent help, and the help's name was Jesus. While we were without strength, Christ died for the ungodly. God demonstrated his love towards us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He helped us by taking our sins upon himself, by being wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquity, chastened for our peace, and bearing stripes for our healing. He helped us by dying our death and going to hell on our behalf. He helped us by robbing death of its sting and the grave of its victory, by being raised on the third day morning with all power in his hand. He's helped us by ascending into heaven and sitting at the right hand of the throne of God, where he's made intercession on our behalf. I don't know about you, but I'm so glad that when I was helpless, the Lord was helping me. When I had no God on my mind, the Lord was helping me. When I couldn't spell Jesus and didn't pray in his name, the Lord was helping me. Am I talking to anybody in here? When I was foolish and rebellious, when I was downright wicked, the Lord was helping me. I'm so glad that he didn't stop helping me. I'm so glad that his help was not conditional. It was unconditional help. It was unfailing help. It was everlasting help. And he kept on calling my name until one day I heard the voice of Jesus say unto me, come unto me and rest. Lay down, thou weary one, lay down thy head upon my breast. I'm talking about me now. I came to Jesus just as I was. I was weary, worn, and sad. I found in him a resting place, and he's made me glad. I'm glad that one day he helped me, and he's been my help ever since. I'm able to say like the psalmist, God is my helper, and the Lord keeps me alive. I can say thus far. Slap five with your neighbor and say, neighbor, I can say thus far that the Lord is for me, and because I can say the Lord is for me, he will help me. I will look in triumph against those who don't like me. He will send help in heaven and rescue me. Stop five with your neighbor and say, neighbor, I'm thinking about everywhere I've been. The Lord has helped me. In every state I've traveled, the Lord has helped me. In every job I've been, every position I've been assigned, the Lord has helped me. Against every enemy, against every foe that I've had to face, the Lord has helped me. When the wicked, even mine enemies, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and they fell. Yeah, I just want to thank you for helping me. And because I got a
a history that says you've helped me everywhere I've been. Here's the good news. My daughter is in D.C., and I know the Lord will help her there. Where are your children that are not where you are? But can you shout and say the Lord is where they are, and the Lord will be their help. The Lord will be their guide. The Lord will be their shelter. The Lord will be their defense. The Lord will be their provision. Thus far, the Lord has helped us. I know we don't like to sing old-timey songs, but there was a song that we used to sing. As a matter of fact, in some churches, it was the processional. When choirs march down the aisle, they'd sing, "We come this far,